Hello and welcome to today's special event, a conversation between Erin O'Leary and Mary Cotillo, aka the Crazy Reading Ladies, and J Palacio about her latest novel, Pony. I'm Maggie Reagan, Senior Editor, Books for Youth at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We encourage everyone to submit their questions for J Palacio for the Q&A portion of today's webinar. Any questions that do not get answered will be passed on to today's panelists after the webinar. Last but not least, Booklist now offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select show or hide subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting subtitle settings. We have a wonderful program for you today, so let's meet today's panelists. Mary Cotillo and Erin O'Leary met while teaching together at a middle school in Massachusetts. It was there that they both earned a reputation and title, the Crazy Reading Ladies. This reading specialist and ELA teacher turned administrator stop at nothing to motivate adolescents to read. Their passion is putting the right books in the right hands at the right time and empowering teachers to be champions of literacy. They have worked with numerous authors, been featured at local and international conferences, and over the last decade, their school-wide reading initiative, All In, has been implemented in schools in Massachusetts, Oklahoma, and Florida. J Palacio is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller Wonder, which has sold over 12 million copies worldwide. The book's message inspired the Choose Kind movement and has been embraced by readers around the world, with the book published in over 50 languages. Wonder was made into a blockbuster movie starring Julia Roberts, Owen Wilson, and Jacob Tremblay. Palacio's other best-selling books include 365 Days of Wonder, Mr. Brown's Book of Precepts, Augie and Me, 3 Wonder Stories, the picture book We're All Wonders, and the graphic novel White Bird, which is currently being filmed as a major motion picture starring Gillian Anderson and Helen Mirren. Palacio lives in Brooklyn with her husband, 2 sons, and 2 dogs. We will now hear from Erin, Mary, and RJ.
Hello, this is super exciting for us. We're pinching ourselves to think that we were just introduced with J Palacio. So thank you so much for joining us. We cannot wait to get started on this conversation. We've been looking forward to it for a long time. I feel like all of the technical things have been covered. The only thing I wanted to add to the introductory remarks is that out of respect for folks who haven't read or finished the book yet, we will not be engaging in any spoilers. There are certain elements of the book that you will know right from the beginning. For example, Mittenwool is a ghost. So we'll talk about those things, but we're not going to be giving away any plot points.
Sounds good.
Yes. So with that said, Raquel, can you tell us about the writing process post Wonder? You know, Wonder was this really big deal, and it's been quite a while since Wonder came out. So can you kind of walk us through taking the time and finding the story that is Pony?
Absolutely, because it's a fun story. I actually like telling the story. You know, I wrote Wonder while I had a full-time job. I was the editorial director at Workman Publishing, and I had this idea for a book. But you know, and my kids were younger then, so the only time I could ever find to actually write was in the middle of the night. I got into this routine where I would get up at midnight and write until 3 a.m, and because I had to go to work the next day, and you know, and all of that. What was really nice is that by the time I started writing Pony, which was 8 years ago, or more, I had segued from my full-time job at Workman to being a full-time author. So I no longer had to work in the middle of the night. Is basic. That was like the good news. The bad news is so I had this idea for Pony, and it was now my full-time job. And again, I had sort of pitched it to Random House, and I was under contract for it. And I started writing it. And I was 2 years into it and 400 pages of a manuscript into it when I realized it just wasn't turning out the way I wanted. I had an idea in my head about the kind of book I wanted to write. And the book that I just labored over for 2 years was just not it. And I wasn't even close to finishing. If I'd continued on that draft, it would have been a, like a 1200, it would have been like a James Michener book. Like it would have been and it's just not what I wanted to write. In my head, I wanted to write a quick epic. So I ended up, I couldn't salvage anything. I couldn't, there was nothing in it because basically the characters were there and the story was there, but the pacing was all wrong, all different. I ended up literally throwing away the manuscript, working on other things, not sure I would ever come back to it. And then during lockdown, this novel kept coming to me and like, write me, like the characters were all there. And for whatever reasons this time around, it flowed out of me. It's almost like it needed those 8 years to really compose itself the right way in my head. It was weird. It was like the most wonderful writing experience. First of all, because I didn't have to write in the middle of the night, but also because it just kind of flowed out of me. I was done in 2 months.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it just kind of, so I do think that those 2 years that I'd put into it,
Yep.
and all the thought that went into that afterwards, because I would think about it over the years, it never quite left me. But I think that it just sometimes, things, nothing before it's time, so it needed that time to gestate.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
We've talked between us that Pony is almost like a book about everything. When students ask, what's this book about? What kind of story is it? And it's like, if you want an epic adventure, if you want a mystery, if you want historical fiction, if you want a book about a kid who loves animals, like this is it has everything in it. And one of the really neat aspects of the publishing process is the way you have these daguerreotypes. Am I pronouncing that?
Yeah,
correctly?
absolutely.
At the beginning of each chapter. So this book seamlessly incorporates concepts such as the very beginnings of photography and things like counterfeiting. So this is extraordinarily well researched. Can you share some of your process for researching this novel?
Thank you. Yeah. And I love how you describe it because I didn't know how to describe it. Is it historical fiction? Somebody referred to it as fantasy. I was like, really? Okay, I guess it is. Yeah. Though I think the ghosts are real. So I don't see it as fantasy, but and I love that because it's also an adventure story. And it's also, like you say, a mystery and there are lots of components to it. And that was what was so fun. And I think that's one of the reasons I had so much trouble figuring it out how to tell the story because there were so many moving parts. The research was probably my favorite part. And I actually brought some of the, because I had to research so much on the history of photography, the handbook of daguerreotypes, I of course researched everything I could on Arabian horses. Of course, there's also, there are bits and pieces, the historical part, we do touch on abolitionism, the Trail of Tears, the Indian Removal Act. There's Cassell's Book of Photography. I mean, and here we go, the counterfeiting, because that was a real fun part too. Anyway, I really enjoyed all of the researching because, first of all, it steeps you in that time period. And it's also kind of moving. I find it really moving to, for instance, to go through, this is the 1859 Annual of Scientific Discovery, right? And you look through it and this is sort of the year of discoveries, and you see what scientists were working on at those times and things that we take for granted now, like electricity and light and all of the conveyances of modern times. And you realize, there were men and women working on these things. And so what I tried to do, that was just one facet of Pony, because basically the story is about a 12-year-old boy named Silas Bird, who is growing up in this very isolated existence. He and his dad live alone in this kind of little house in the middle of nowhere on the American frontier in the 1850s. And his only companion is his ghost companion, his best friend that he's known since he was a baby, named Mittenwool. And in the middle of the night, these three outlaws come and they basically kidnap the dad, who they think is someone else, who was a counterfeiter. The dad, Martin Bird, is this kind of genius inventor that's been living in isolation with Silas and homeschooling him. And so anyway, researching all of that, like sort of what kind of things Martin Bird might have been working on and all of that. That was I love it. That's so much fun. And then of course the daguerreotypes happened because I've been collecting daguerreotypes since I was a teenager. I love photography. I've been into sort of the photography in terms of not just the history, but I took photography in art school and all of that. So I had some of these daguerreotypes in my collection that actually ended up informing that I use them in the chapter openers. Yeah, so that's like the one that I chose. To me, when I saw this daguerreotype, which was in my collection, I thought, oh my goodness, that is Silas Bird. That's him. So it was really kind of it was fascinating for me to be able to sort of realize that a lot of times I would be describing a character as if I knew him, and then it's like, oh, it's because I've seen it. I have a picture, and that's who was in my mind when I was thinking about, like, here's the villain, Roscoe All-Arenshaw, and he was in my head. I didn't even remember seeing him, but then as I was going through the collection, I realized that, oh, I was describing somebody, this guy. So it was really kind of fascinaing.
So these people have been with you for a while. These are not pictures that you found for the book. They're pictures that
some of them I did collect a few, or I had a different version, and then I'd be on eBay and it's like, oh, wait a minute, this one's better. But like Silas, and in fact, there's one of a father and son. Let's see if I can find that one. That I had, and that from the very beginning, that was like this one. I found this one really touching, and I use it in the frontispiece. Again, it's very hard to see them because they're on mirrored surfaces. That one of a father and a son, and no mom in the picture. Yeah. And we kind of can assume that there's a story there, So, I've always loved sort of these old photographs because I kind of I'm a storyteller, and I can't help but like invent stories in my mind about them. So that's how this all really started.
That's wonderful.
Well, not only is the book phenomenally well researched, but it's so beautifully told. We talk about the best middle grade authors honor their readers, without being trite. It was very satisfying. And I think because of the way you built this world for your characters, can you talk a little bit about merging the supernatural element with reality? I think far and away, the students that we have spoken to about this book, that was what thrilled them the most, that they had not read a book that had done that before. So can you talk about your influences?
Yeah, I've always loved stories which kind of cross into different lifetimes, whether it's a movie like Ghost, or movies like The Sixth Sense too, or The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, which I even mentioned in Wonder, was a movie that I used to watch. It was a black and white movie with Rex Harrison and Gene Tierney, one of my favorite movies of all time, about the ghost of a sea captain that haunts this house, and he and the protagonist fall in love. But in any case, I've just always been drawn to sort of these kinds of ghost stories, and I wanted to tell the story in a way where the ghost element isn't the fantastical part. The ghost element is actually quite ordinary. I mean, Silas happens to be a boy who sees ghosts. Other people can't see him, but that doesn't mean that Mittenwool, who only Silas can see, isn't like flesh and blood. He's a real person for Silas. He can hear him. He can, as he says, he's astonished other people can't see him, because for him, Mitten will cast a shadow. He gets dirty fingernails, like he's real. And so I think what I tried to do is I made the rules of Ghost World very simple for myself, in that the ghosts, not every ghost knows he's dead. That's, a given. I mean, I kind of assume that just like when we're alive, we don't have all the answers to life and the mysteries of life. I don't know if when we pass on, that suddenly becomes apparent. I figure that we probably are the same people we are, but just kind of figuring out what the next step is and where the next phase will lead us. So that's my approach to Ghost World, that Silas experiences the ghosts the way they themselves experience themselves, and once I had that sort of basic rule, it was kind of easy to just follow it through to its conclusion. I mean, that and sometimes you have to be really disciplined with the rules and keep them simple, but it actually then opens up a lot of avenues in terms of storytelling. And I think if your readers are responding to that, I think it's basically because, yeah, I mean, I try really hard never to talk down to young readers ever. And I honestly wrote Pony. I would have written the exact same book for adults. I think the only difference would have been that if I'd written this book for adults, the only difference would have been I would have used curse words. Like I would have used, they wouldn't have been like I had to come up with lots of ways, darnation and, lots of things that people would have used in those days that sort of were euphemisms for curse words. So if I'd written for adults, I would have been cursing a little bit more, because it would have been natural for the characters. And that's the only difference, though. I mean, the sentences, the sort of the poetry, the frightening aspects, I didn't hold back just because they were younger kids. And hopefully maybe that's one of the things that your readers are reacting to, that they feel that.
I think so.
Yes.
I think it's something you mentioned that ghosts don't always know. They're just like us, but in the next world. One of the things that touched me was how frustrated Silas got when Mitten didn't know something. He would say, well, why this? Why? And Mitten was like, I don't know. I don't know. And that relationship, to me, is one of the things that makes Silas such a real kid. We live in the world of middle school students, so we know Silas. We know Silas because we know the kids who read a lot of books and use that kind of language, but at the same time are going to throw a temper tantrum because they're tired and hungry.
Right.
So, one of the things that thinking about Silas and thinking about his upbringing is you mentioned he's homeschooled by his father. He's isolated from his peers. And it made us kind of think about the role of schooling over the past 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we're wondering, do you have thoughts? Like, are there takeaways that you hope people will, are there ideas you hope people will take away from this in terms of school and education and reading?
Yeah, well, I think reading is what is more than anything. I think books are what in the timeline of human history are what connect us to the past, to the future. I think that literature is something, good books are timeless. So I know, for instance, so for those of you who don't know my background, I'm a first generation American. Here I am sort of taking on the most classic genre of American, of Americana, which is like, the Western. And yet I'm like, again, a first generation from Columbia. And yet, my dad, who was born in 1919, loved Greek mythology. He grew up on the Odyssey, and he was possibly the most well-read human being I've ever known. He's read everything. And he passed, and my mom as well, passed that love of sort of classical literature to me, so when I was little, that was sort of what my father, those were the stories that I heard, not so much, Little Red Riding Hood. but Ulysses and Achilles and all of that stuff, because that's what fascinated my dad. And there's no reason, and what's kind of, for me, like beautiful is that, children in the 1800s, that's the literature they would have been reading as well. I mean, that's that and other things. Of course, there were always lots of avenues of fiction and stuff, but sort of the classics, the stories that were told that have stayed with us over time are the ones that captured sort of the universal longing that we all feel as human beings. In terms of the Odyssey of Ulysses, the story of Ulysses, it's about a man who wants to go home, and his son Telemachus misses his father. And those are the very themes that play in Pony a lot. So it seemed sort of to make a lot of sense for me to reference that. And there are lots of little moments throughout where, for good readers, or for like really careful readers, they might sort of see all those connections that, oh, the name of the dog is Argos, and Argus was Odysseus's dog. And, Telemachus, which turns out to be Silas's favorite book, is a story of Telemachus looking for his father. So these are stories, these are themes that resonate. And they resonate because they're tied, they're imbued with humanity. They tell the story of the human condition, of love and of quests and of finding home and seeking comfort, and so Pony is those larger themes. I mean, that's the story I'm trying to tell about a boy who just wants to find his home, and that's what he's looking for. And he goes to look for it, and don't want to tell what happens, but that's basically the story. So in terms of schooling and education, I believe so much in the value of books to be able to teach us and carry those messages from one generation through the next.
You're speaking to our collective.
Yes.
And there are so many things that we're hoping that that you understand the power that this book is having on children. Mm-hmm. This is something that is going to allow educators to connect with the children in their classroom.
I love that.
It has such a unifying power about it, and something that occurred to us is like, this whole last year and a half, everybody has struggled with different things. Everybody has grieved. Everybody has lost, whether it was just an opportunity or something as simple as a birthday party, or, a parent, something more serious, like a parent losing a job, or even the death of someone, a family member. I feel like this book has the power to sort of unite us in those, understanding that loss can also include those moments of transformation. Life is not good or bad. There's love and there's loss, and that we're all sort of united in that grieving and that suffering, and that there's a way through it.
That is so beautifully said. Oh my goodness. And that is everything I could have hoped to try to speak to, because it's not, I mean, as I said, I did start writing this during lockdown. I started writing this in April of 2020, which is, I live in Brooklyn, and literally we were the epicenter of COVID in the world during that month. I don't know if you guys remember the news, but outside our windows, we would hear the ambulances 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was nonstop. And I was very, I mean, we were all, we were in lockdown with my older son came back from college, he's in grad school. He and his girlfriend ended up, we all sort of locked down together, and my younger son, and of course my husband and our two dogs, but we were keenly aware of the dramas taking place all around us. Luckily, we were able to hunker down, but we knew other people weren't that lucky. And really, I wanted to write something that would bring comfort to me, to bring comfort to anybody who's struggling with loss, Anyone, and as you so beautifully say, it's not just loss of life, but loss of opportunity, missed graduations, missed birthday party. There's so much loss. And understand that we, in a way, we're connected by that loss, right? That's something we all experience. And Silas, or seeing it through Silas's eyes and understanding what he's lost, and understanding that it's all part of the journey. I mean, the tagline of the book is "Love is a journey without end," because I really think that more than anything is what struck me. That was the lesson I learned from COVID and from writing this book, is that it all comes down to love, who we choose to love in our lifetimes, and knowing that that love never ends, and supporting one another, finding the connections between us, thinking about them, thinking, were my ancestors somehow, did they know your answers, Erin or Mary? I mean, who knows, the ties that bind us are invisible. We have absolutely no idea, but we probably all are connected at some point or other, and we should treat each other that way, So anyway, that's kind of some of the stuff I was trying to get at. Thank you for pointing it out, though. You guys are awesome.
We were talking about, this, you're talking about, you wanted to write something to comfort yourself. We definitely found it comforting. It has a very familiar feel to it. It feels like a classic.
Yeah.
That I hadn't discovered before. Mm-hmm. And there is, while there are fairy tale elements to this story, or a fairy tale like feel to at least parts of it, like the wood,
right?
It's not a fairy tale ending. And, I think the fact that we have a realistic ending and we still feel that sense of comfort and satisfaction,
yeah,
I think speaks very much. Can I go back to the concept of the fairy tale? It's not a fairy tale ending, but there are elements of this that feel very fairy tale-esque. Can we talk a little bit about the setting? Because I feel like the setting is a character in and of itself. So it's set pre-Civil War. There's the wood features prominently, almost as a character in and of itself. So
capital W.
Capital W.
Yeah.
So could you talk to us a little bit about, your thoughts about the setting and how you worked, how did it all come together?
Well, it's set, technically it's set in Ohio, in a space probably near Gambier, because that is actually when I started writing it again, those 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. I was, my older son was touring colleges and we were touring Kenyon. So I happened to I had a lot of time in a hotel room in Gambier and in Ohio. And I was writing, and I started writing the book, and I kind of was reading a little bit about where I was, and I loved the scenery and the, so that's where it starts, and there was a reason for it. Also, as I was reading a little bit more about it, I found out that there were two professors that went to that taught at Kenyon, who actually were one of the inventors of the collodion process. There were a lot of coincidences. So, so in the beginning, like I said, those 8 years ago, I had done extensive research, I literally had like a 3-foot map of Silas's journey, like a geographic map. And I researched how long it would have taken, to ride a horse from point A to point B. I was getting really technical. I knew how long it would take the train from Philadelphia to, Akron. It was over the top, as you saw. It was I knew everything. I had trains. It was crazy. And in a way, I think that was one of the reasons that first draft didn't work. I was so tied to sort of the reality of the geography that it was really kind of it was onerous and it was stifling. And one of the things that occurred to me when I started writing this time around is that, it's a 12-year-old boy. And not that a 12-year-old boy wouldn't have an understanding of the world and a map of the world in his head, but most of the time, I grew up in Queens. I knew where people lived down the block, I knew where the park was, but I didn't know the map of where I lived exactly. And I figured that Silas, for him, the woods are nameless. It's just the woods, and they terrify him. They're full of really old trees, and they're big, and it's dark in there. The woods, that's what he calls them. The ravine, the salt licks, which is where the plains that he kind of travels to get to the woods. Those are the names he would know, not the place names, not it's the river. It's that's it. And that was really freeing to me, because it also helped create a world, like you just pointed out, that was a little bit mysterious, which is exactly the world he inhabits as a 12-year-old boy facing the world all on his own. It's a mysterious world. And it just made so much sense. It was the most freeing, one of the things that really like went off like a light bulb. It's like, oh, it's the woods. I'll just capitalize everything, and it was fun having debates with my copy editor, because okay, when do we capitalize the woods? It's like, we capitalize the woods whenever Silas is referring to them as a place, and that's how sort of that became the structure. And it really, the book then became a journey in the real world, but as described by a 12-year-old boy in the map of his mind.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Again, we know Silas. That
it was such an authentic experience to be on this
Yes.
journey with him, and even to see his train of thought. That I thought, you as an author, as we have the experience of reading it, it's almost like as a reader, sometimes you get questions in your mind, like, oh, well, why is he thinking this? Or how are these people connected? You would answer it. Like, Silas didn't even have to ask it. And I think that's why this was so satisfying to the students who have read it, because, without making everything fit so neatly, you did, in Silas's mind and in his narration, you sort of answered the questions. You gave the readers what they needed, even if they couldn't verbalize that they needed it.
Well, that's so cool to hear. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I find one of my pet peeves, whether it's in movies or books, is things that don't make sense, when in a movie, when they leave, they're getting chased by somebody and they leave the door wide open behind them, things like that. So I definitely wanted the adventure and the mystery and the scary parts, because there are scary parts, to be real, and for Silas to respond to them in a way that seemed real to me. And people often ask me why I write from the point of view of a little boy, and I I'm a girl. I think it's I have two sons, and I'm around boys a lot, between them and all their friends, and growing up, and boys speak and boy think kind of comes very naturally to me. So I love that you say that Silas is a real boy to you, because he's a real boy to me.
Yes.
I mean, he's real.
And we felt like he is a real boy. He's not a fictional boy who is, throwing punches and spitting and fighting. He's a boy who is angry, and a boy who cries, and a boy who misses his father. Mm-hmm. So to me, there isn't any sort of false masculinity or anything that I have to worry about. He's a boy. And we have this wonderful non-traditional father figure. So this is a story dominated by male characters, but none of them are stereotypical male. Well, none of the good guys are stereotypical.
Yeah. Absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's helpful for adolescents, because adolescents have these very black and white ideas about things, right? Like, men behave this way, women behave this way, and they have a difficult time seeing the shades of gray. Mm-hmm. In Pony, we have characters who, present one way and there's hiding something else. So I'm wondering, were there, when you were writing about it, and I'm thinking, I don't want to give any spoilers away.
We're doing so well.
I know.
No, we're okay.
I will.
Yeah, give me a hint so I'll know.
Okay. Well, thinking about Martin Bird, the kinds of transformations that people have over the course of their lifetime. You know, maybe just, would you mind talking about him for a little while and your thoughts about Martin and his role, you know, his life as a scientist, his life as a father, his life as a husband, those kinds of things?
So Martin Bird is Silas's dad, and he is absolutely one of my favorite characters of all time, I have to say. And one of the reasons is because he is somebody without the benefit of opportunity in his life. He is his backstory, which is touched on very briefly, is, you know, he sort of grew up kind of an orphan himself in Scotland, and through hook and through crook and whatever it took, he got on a ship to New York City, and he made his way in the world. And what that way was is something of a mystery. When we encounter Martin, he is simply a loving dad who had the misfortune to become widowed on the day his son was born. His wife died in childbirth. And his goal in life is simply to raise his son with love and give him the opportunities that he himself never had. We know that he's a genius. We know that this is a man who, and his own son knows it. Look, if my pa had the opportunity, he would have been the Newton of his day. You know, he would have been Galileo. He would have been inventing things and whatever. But, you know, sometimes people are just not born into the opportunity to be able to do these things. And so that is Martin's life. He finds the love of his life in Silas's mom. And so that, you know, he's carrying that too. And again, these are so many of these things. And I think, again, one of the reasons I see your reaction and the way I think adults might read it differently than kids is you see a lot of the stories between the lines that kids might not see when they're reading the adventure and the journey and the you know, the gunfights and all of that. I think adults might be reading between the lines and see the sort of the sadness inherent in the love story that was never, that was and then is no longer, you know, and sort of the brief glimpses into the lives of the adults and why they are the way they are and stuff. So and that was sort of, you know, walking a fine line always, like not wanting to, as a writer, not wanting to divulge too much, not wanting, you know, there's a part of me, I could have written an entire book on the adventures of the two deputies, the sheriff and his deputy. I find them so picaresque, these guys, these two, you know, I love them.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, so, you know, so there are lots of stories to tell, but again, I wanted to focus on Silas's journey, which is why we see everything through his point of view. And that was the way to go.
It's almost like this book begs to be read more than once. And
Yes.
I feel like you're going to find there are going to be different things that are there for you at different stages of your life. Like you said, children will get things out of it, adults will get some different things out of it, but even, you know, once you have completed the story, you're going to want to go back. I think this is going to be, we've already referenced, you know, we keep going through and finding these beautiful quotes that we feel like were written for us, that they totally weren't. You know,
maybe they were, I don't know.
We're connected invisibly.
Yeah.
This, I mean, and we just see this as such a powerful book to connect teachers with their students in the classroom. This is a book that is begging to be taught, is begging to be shared, is going to be just a favorite read aloud.
I mean, there
experience.
are so many things that teachers could do with this in their classroom. You know, from the perspective of background information, building background information, that, you know, the photography processes, the historical timeline alone, you have just a wealth of things that you can connect students to. We did, I feel like this is as good a time as any to, if there are teachers or librarians watching who are interested in some of our lesson ideas, we did put them up on our blog. So all you have to do is search Crazy Reading Ladies, and the first thing you're going to find is our blog, and there are some lessons there. We didn't want to take time today to go into lesson planning, but we had to get it out of our system because I think that's just what we do. We read and we figure out, how would I teach this?
I love it.
So,
Yeah.
so that is available for folks. And I wonder, do you feel like it's time to share what our students thought?
We had a wonderful opportunity through Miss Palacio and Random House to have sort of a book group of these premier first readers. So we would love to share. They had some thoughts that they wanted to share.
I can't wait. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Yes, this is
Great.
exciting.
We are ready for the video.
So this kid named Silas is pa or slash father gets taken away, and what his father does is do photographs for, it's on tin, so it's not really on paper, so it's like, it wasn't like what we have in the 21st century. So anyway, I have photographs that are like, I think 100 years old. Anyway, this is Laura. She's my great grandmother. Then this is Samuel Goldthwait. Oh, by the way, Laura is his wife, so Laura Goldthwait. And this is my great grandfather.
I finished Pony yesterday, and I thought it was really good.
Because, like, it's just most books don't have things about, like, just, like, a whole nother, like, world that not everyone can see.
I loved Silas's family, and I liked how RJ put it because she did a really good job of saying who everybody was, like even the mom describing her, even though she was dead and she wasn't really a part of the story. And you could tell that Silas was so loved by his parents because the way they described him, and he seemed so happy before his pa left.
There was a quote on the first page of chapter 4 which I thought went really well with the character of Silas. The quote is, "Any body which has been exposed to light retains in darkness this light." I thought this went so well with Silas because his light is his memories of his father and his mother. He has these memories with his father and they keep him going even in the darkness, which in this case is having his father taken from him. He retains the light he has experienced and pushes forward using this light as his strength to follow the men who took Pa away.
He goes with his gut a lot, which is strong, so he goes with what his gut decides, which I think is pretty strong. Instead of deciding with your heart and your gut, he always goes with his gut.
I liked it because it was really original, and I never read something that was like that, so it was really interesting for me, and I couldn't predict anything because Mitten Wool changed everything. So when I finished the book, I automatically thought this was one of my favorite books ever because it had such an interesting plot. And it was really mysterious, but it was an adventure. And he was always looking for home, which reminded me a little bit of Ulysses, and I liked Ulysses, so I enjoyed it.
I thought the supernatural element to it really added to the story and made it better. It's all this mystery to it because the supernatural on its own is kind of undefined. There's all these mysteries to it and nobody knows exactly what it's like and everyone has their own interpretation. So I think that was a really cool thing to add to the story because not only is it now an adventure, it also has a mysterious aspect to it. So yeah, I thought it was a really cool addition to the story.
Oh my God. Oh my God. All right. I've got tears in my eyes. That was unbelievable. I mean, I am blown away. What great readers, first of all, what great kids. But
Yeah.
Oh my God, they got it. I mean, like, they totally like, oh my, I feel like I paid them.
You wrote Ulysses. Did you hear that?
I know. And Bella likes Ulysses. I love that. And that, yeah, like, honestly, seeing some of those girls, it kind of reminded me a little of, being 11 years old and loving reading.
Yes.
And also not always just wanting to read kind of the same thing, wanting to be challenged. And these, and there was always a part of me that was like, am I writing too, high up here? And I really would think about sort of the kids I've known, that love reading, that, let's challenge them. If it's a little up here, they can rise to it and feel good about it. So thank you. That was amazing. Wow.
You gave them what they needed. You honored them. Kids know good books, they just do. And this gave them something to comfort them after a difficult year and to inspire them. And it's just a good story. We can talk all we want about setting and supernatural elements and research, but it's just a good story. And that's what kids react to. And they're loving Pony. So thank you for giving
that. Is so great. And it really does validate sort of that choice to like get rid of that old draft of the book, because I knew it wasn't what I wanted to write. And this time around, it was feeling like this was the book I wanted to write, the quick epic, because ultimately it's a linear story and it's very fast paced. It starts at point A and it ends at point, Q or whatever. And everything in between happens in a very linear way. So it's easy to follow, but it's also, I was trying for a lot of themes, and hearing them talk about all of those themes, it's I'm blown away. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I think we do have some time to take some questions
Oh,
from
cool.
the audience. So if Booklist will read some of your questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Hi. Yeah, we've got a few great questions coming in from the audience. So we'll kick one off that's something you've touched on a little bit here, but someone wants to know if there are any parts of your research that you weren't able to include into the book that you still think about and wish you'd been able to add.
Oh, there's so much there. There's there's so much I would have liked. And in fact, some probably even made it into earlier drafts of the book, more details. But ultimately, I think it's really important when you're telling a story to not get bogged down by the research. The moment the research becomes an exercise in showing how much you know, it bogs down the story. And so it would take away from that quick epic thing I wanted. So I figure, look, if kids are curious to know more about certain aspects of abolitionism, for instance, the sheriff's dad, it just very quickly mentioned that he comes from an abolitionist family. So I'm hoping that kids will sort of read up more on what that means and what that was. And there are aspects of American history that are taught less than other aspects of American history. But it's all out there. You can read about it. And so in the glossary, I really try to give kids some books that they might want to, read from Frederick Douglass, there's read some books about the Indian Removal Act and things like that, so that they can kind of understand the historical footprints of the book, without my having to teach it. I'll leave it to the the crazy reading ladies and your ilk to actually fill out the historical aspects of it for whoever wants it. So that's how I approached it.
So we had a few questions about what it was like to sort of be creating during a pandemic and a time that was really dark and stressful for a lot of people, but especially for people in creative industries. And someone wanted to know if you found your writing shifting to be kind of darker and more troubling during this time that was darker and more troubling just due to the stress of 2020 and the pandemic? Or was it easier for you to kind of keep the love in your book and in your writing?
Yeah, I don't, for whatever reasons, I mean, I think this book always had a darker edge to it than something like Wonder. Um, I started, when I started writing the book, again, 8-9 years ago, I was dealing, my own father, who I just referenced earlier, was, and he was 94 years old, but he was dying. And my mom had passed away almost 20 years ago. So I was facing, even though I'm an old lady, I'm in my 50s and stuff, still, I so remember being a kid and being so afraid that something would happen to my parents, right? Isn't that sort of the most fundamental fear that so many of us experience? And whether you're 10 years old or you're in your 50s, when you've lost both parents, there is that moment when you think, oh my goodness, I'm an orphan, and that fear that I've always carried, and it's here, and I'm facing it. And also then realizing that, okay, I'm going to be okay, and I'll always remember them, and I love them, and they did so much for me. That love, again, I just kind of kept coming back to me that this was just about love. And so for me, writing in lockdown was a comforting experience, because really the book is dripping in love. Like, everything about it really is. It's about that, as one of the children just said, it's, Silas, even though he grows up without his mom, has a real image and a connection with her that is purely just love, and I was hoping, one of my great hopes is that people who have experienced some recent losses and they read this and they get that, they'll feel that comfort.
The students of Shahala Middle School want to know if you have writing advice for kids their age who are maybe hoping to become published authors one day.
Published authors. There's a difference between being a published author and a writer. Let's remember that, first of all, in that, I was a writer long before I became a published author, and that's good. Like, so I would suggest to anybody who wants to be a published author to concentrate on the writing and write the books that you want to read. I mean, the key to writing to me is just read a lot. Read a lot. You gain so much. I mean, you might read a bad book, but there might be an incredible passage in that bad book that's just beautifully written, and you'll remember that. And you read as much as you can. Anything that fascinates you, read it. And anything that's beautiful, that's fun. Everything is good. Read, if you like graphic novels, read that. It's all about stories. And if you like to tell a story, find some way to just tell that story. And like everything, writing is a craft, and you get better with practice. So forgetting about being a published author, if you commit to writing as much as possible, you are building your craft. You are learning what you need to do in order to someday write something that's good enough to be published, and then you'll be a published author.
And then we have someone who's wondering, after you just had such huge mainstream success with Wonder, and you had the success of the book and the movie, what kind of effect did that have on you when you were working on Pony and transitioning into this new work?
That's a great question, because I was nervous. I've always been nervous about like understanding that I have a connection with my readers, that Wonder was a really special book for a lot of young people. And I honor that completely. And I know that when I love a book, I want the author to write the same book over and over again. Like, I just want to read more, but I want it to be the exact same book, just a little different. And so I was a little nervous that kids who love Wonder, who rightly want to just read more Wonder books, and which is something I'm committed to not doing, because I just feel like Wonder should be its own thing. And I've written a few satellite books, but I didn't want there to be a Wonder book 1, Wonder book 2, I never wanted to go down that avenue as much as I think my publisher would have loved that. But so Pony, I also want to write stuff that challenges me, and that I find fun and interesting. And I love horses. I grew up loving horses. So I wanted to write a book about a horse, and I love photography, and I like historical fiction, and I love ghosts. And so, Pony is full of the things that I love writing about. And I just was a little nervous that the kids who love wonder would be disappointed that Pony isn't wonder, and so that's why seeing that video was just amazing, because it was like it's very very affirming. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that video.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. And congratulations. I believe you are one of the few authors to have 2 books on the New York Times bestseller list. I believe.
Yeah,
so congratulations.
Thank you.
That's extraordinary.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
Great. Well, if there are any more audience questions that we missed, those will be emailed out, so you'll have a chance to answer them after the webinar. And then Erin and Mary, was there anything else you had to wrap up before we end our panel?
I don't think so. Just again, our most sincere thanks for the opportunity to sit and have this conversation. We thank you so much for giving us Pony, for giving Pony to our students, for giving us the opportunity to connect with our students using your work. So thank
you so much. I really appreciate it. This talk has been absolutely delightful and marvelous in every single way. Thank you so much. I was scrolling through the chats, and I saw one from somebody who said that she's a fellow Colombian. So I just wanted to do a shout out. So hi, and just thank everybody for just being so great about Pony and receptive and open and getting it. Because you're just, sometimes when you're writing, you're just like, you're afraid people aren't going to get it, and you guys have just sort of really affirmed that communication that happens between writer and reader. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
This is a book to share with people you love.
Yes.
That's how we loved the book. We read it and wanted to pass it on. So please make sure that you're sharing this book with somebody who needs a little love, or somebody that you want to express love to. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. Also, I don't know if you guys know this, but they showed the trailer in the beginning. Those are my sons in the trailer.
Are they really?
Yeah. So I just thought I'd share that with everyone if you want to take another look. So the boy that plays the guitar, who's Mittenwool in the book, and the older, the singer, the main singer, is my older son. So it was our COVID project. We filmed it in August in Brooklyn. Got the costumes and all that. I know, it was so much fun. So I just thought I'd throw that out there as well.
Thanks for sharing that. That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Erin, Mary, and RJ, for this fantastic talk. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing a link to today's video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. If you're not yet a subscriber, pair the page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access at booklist.online.com, and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of the special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Patron-friendly, librarian-approved, and free with a Booklist subscription, Booklist Reader, Booklist new digital-only magazine highlighting diverse readers' advisory recommendations for all ages, has arrived. To see and share the latest issue, which is currently available free to all, visit booklistonline.com/reader-issues. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more huge thank you to Erin, Mary, and RJ, and to our sponsor, Random House Children's Books. This concludes today's webinar.